Audio.
I'd rather trade him out of Weimar from now on.
Good morning.
Good morning. How's it looking?
Good. I see a mast.
It's just a unfinished oar shaft.
Ah.
Same diameter, so I stuck it in there.
Have you heard anything about when the sales should be in?
I mean, the last I talked to Josh about it, he was expecting them any time
Excellent.
Good.
because he ordered 14 of them, so they should be, because he already has the masts.
Oh, okay.
After different source, and he's just been waiting on the sales.
Oh, okay.
All right.
So I see you have the
Mast in there.
no,
It's just an
you
oar.
have the trunk in.
Yeah, it's just I've just got it dry fit.
So we want to make sure we rough up the epoxy, right?
Yeah, you want to do a really good job of that. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Joel. I'm going to be watching you on the YouTube live feed.
Okay.
So I'm going to drop off here, but I'm here.
Sounds good. How's the back feeling?
It's still recovering, so I'm just sitting in the easy chair right now.
Sounds good. Yeah, whenever you heal up and get ready to start motoring, just feel free to give me a shout.
All right. That sounds great.
How's it going, Eric?
Hey, Joel.
Hey,
It's
Ricky.
Ricky.
How are you doing?
Good. So, look at that mast. Whoa.
Yeah, it's a dummy mast. It's actually just a
Oh,
it's a oar
Okay.
shaft. I hadn't finished yet, so.
all right.
But it's 1.5 inch diameter, so I figured I'd drop it in there. Make for a.
Cool. All right. I'm going to mute myself and turn off the video, but I'm here.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I think we got a couple stragglers today, so we'll do Q&A kind of to start. And, I'll get started probably 10 after, I'm guessing. 10, 15 after.
I guess I do have a question if you're taking questions.
Yeah.
The barrel bolts that I got in my kit that go through the area where the cheek doubler is.
Okay.
Let me think. No, it was not those. I'm sorry. It was the through bolts that attach the pintles to the rudder. We're not quite long enough. Did you find that to be true with yours too, or they're like a quarter inch short?
We figured that out about halfway through day 2 when we were doing the just test mock-up of the rudder assembly.
Okay.
If you haven't, Josh was going to send out the new parts, but if he didn't send them to you, you can always swing by Duckworks and he'll give those to you.
Okay.
They just
All
need
right.
1.5 inches instead of 1.25 inches, which was what was included.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Steven.
Hello, hello.
How's everything in lovely Port Angeles today?
God, we had a little bit of warmth there for a little while. I got excited, but no, it's cold. I think I'm going to leave the garage door closed. Oh.
We've been stuck in kind of a low ceiling for the last couple of days.
Yeah. No, not good. Actually, I got to get these kayaks out of the garage. Hold on.
Oh, I have another question.
Sure.
The wood screws for their through bolts, I guess, for attaching the what are the things that the pintles go in on the transom? Shouldn't they have washers on them on the inside?
Well, the idea there, I mean, you could put a washer there. You're just talking about when that gudgeon mounts to the transom?
Yes, right, yeah.
Ideally, we're gonna run through this doubler at the top, which should give kind of plenty of meat there. And then ideally too, you would back the gudgeon where you connect it underneath the seat as well.
Right.
Which should allow you to just kind of harden those up with the nylox, and you don't really. I mean, you can put a washer there. I don't think it's necessary. I think that's why they were left out of the kit.
Okay, I'm just used to putting a washer when you have a bolt going through wood like that.
Yeah. I mean, but because it's pretty well backed.
Okay.
They should be fine. And for myself, I'll actually put the head of the screw on the inside of the boat and let the nut kind of run out on the back. Just a little cleaner to look on the end of that machine screw coming through.
So I missed.
Go ahead.
I missed last Friday's session, and I was watching the video, but I didn't get all the way, I guess, because I'm seeing that your rudder trunk sits, your daggerboard trunk sits proud of the seat.
Sure.
Are you going to be cutting that flush today?
So it's actually not installed. It's just dry fit in there into place right now. If I give it a whack, it'll pop right to the bottom of the boat.
Okay.
But yeah, ideally, when I install it, I'm going to end up running a pretty heavy fillet around the top and the bottom, and I'll leave it a little bit proud on the top and bottom, just so that I can just trim it flush once that epoxy sets.
Okay, and then how does that the cap on the dagger board, does that eventually ultimately sit proud of the seat too in its final form?
Yeah, in its final form, it will sit on the surface of the seat, so you'll have that quarter inch just kind of sitting on the seat. Same with that the little plug.
Yeah, I was looking at that plug. It doesn't fit perfectly in the trunk, so is there something else we're going to do to make it kind of sit in there right?
Right, so the plug, and the reason the plug was short, because it's shorter this end, is the biggest reason was because there wasn't enough wood on the sheet of plywood to make it full length.
Oh.
It's kind of a puzzle going through, but ideally it's kind of there, just wiggling around, because we're going to install that and the shock cord will hold it in place.
Oh, okay. And so just as a reminder, I mean, where are we supposed to be? We're supposed to just be focusing on the trunk today, or are we going to do the gudgeons in the back as well? Help me understand what is our goals for today.
Yeah, so today we're looking at trying to get that, we're going to get the trunk installed. We're going to run those fillets, and then we're also going to install the hardware for the rudder. Get that rudder assembled and put the hardware on the boat, get it test fit, make sure it looks nice, and from there, I'll be available to answer any and all questions for other steps that maybe we want to go over again, or or move forward with. Just giving it a couple more minutes. Cena was running a little bit late, as well as Warren. So I was going to shoot for about 10 after to get started.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of was the biggest kind of goal for getting through this. The other step we'll take is with our dagger board, is getting that the cap bonded on there as well, running some fillets. If you've got some extra leftover fiberglass laying around, we'll just need a couple little thin strips there to just really help tie the trunk, the foil itself to that cap, just to make sure, because dropping it in and out of that trunk can create some wear. I don't know if it's kind of gotten started there. I'll switch over cameras to take a look at the rudder assembly. And if anyone's had any questions there on kind of getting that assembled, I just got it hanging off that transom there. So basically what I've done is just gone ahead and run through the just standard assembly for all the parts. I've got those pintles in place, and just ran all the barrel bolts and got my my coil attached. And I even went ahead and ran the paracord. I just put a little wooden bead on the end to kind of help with that haul. But yeah, ideally, because we'll want the rudder assembled to be able to fit for placement for our gudgeons on that transom. And I've already got mine put together. I'm not sure what everyone else has done, but if you wanted to, yeah, if you got any questions on getting that put together, haven't put it together and want to get started, that's fine.
Joel?
Yep.
For the tiller itself, are people staying with that laminated plywood, or do some people want to do the solid wood tiller?
So with the kits, and I think as we sent them out before you had registered, we are doing we lengthened the tiller, and we're going with a solid wood tiller. If you want to, I'd build these and put them in the kits. Next time you come by the shop, because I know you swing by here a fair bit, and you see me in, just tug on my shirt tail and I'll cut one for you.
Oh, great. Excellent. Thank you. Are they the same? Is it the same dimension as the laminated one?
No, so it's a bit longer and it's a little thicker.
A little thicker. So I might have to shave something off of the cheeks to make it fit. Or I noticed that on the cheeks on the new system that you're working with, there's a little groove. You said that there was a ridge, and I see that it's a little thinner up there where the tiller sits.
Yeah, so I think yours, because you had the earlier rendition, it doesn't have the same width. So it's fine. Yeah. I'll just mill this. I can mill the tiller to a different width to accommodate.
All right. Josh doesn't have these over at Duckworks. You have to build it.
He has the tiller themselves. He has a couple more of these tillers over there, I believe.
Yeah.
But again, if you have the older rendition, the 2.0 of the rudder kit, this will be too wide, I think, for your kit, for your slot.
Okay.
You could go by there and grab one, but I also don't mind cutting one for you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Hey, Joel, I wanted to remind everybody, and maybe you might want to mention it again when everybody gets in, is that if they're not actively involved in a question, to mute their microphone. Some people have some really good microphones, and with their sanding or using power tools, it kind of drowns you out, and we can't hear what you're saying. I can even hear people eating sometimes.
Nice. Yeah, and I generally try and patrol it a bit. So if we get a little extra noise, I'll mute someone if they haven't done it themselves. So thanks for the reminder, though. Always helpful.
Let me apologize. That's usually me. I'm wearing a set of AirPods and the microphone's pretty good. And yes, I'm snacking on chips right now. So my apologies. Going back to mute.
The AirPods, I should have known. That's why it was so good.
All right, so we kind of talk a little about the rudder there. I'm going to switch cameras again. We can go ahead and just dive in with kind of the steps we're looking at making today. Kind of the first, you'll notice I've already got my trunk kind of slotted in, dry fit. And that's what we're looking for, is just looking to get a nice fit. Again, a little bit of play in there is not going to be bad when you're fitting this in, just because it's going to allow, once we have run our fillets and it's all cured, we trim it off. We'll come back around the edges, or you'll come back around the edges and fill any little gaps with some unthickened epoxy to really help penetrate, just so one, to seal everything in, get it well bonded, and two, to keep from any intrusion of water in the future. And then that'll be the same for trimming it on the bottom, is you'll flip the boat over and then just you'll trim it flush to the bottom, come back, fill in any of that end grain, give it a sand, and fill any little gaps that you may have. But the kind of the prep, what we're looking for, once you fit it, you're happy with the placement, everything looks good, is kind of falling back on the basics of working with epoxy, is that we need to, because we're well outside the window of a chemical bond for that epoxy system, we're looking for to get that good physical bond, that good mechanical bond, and it's going to be really being fairly diligent in scuffing that surface up. And the surfaces that we're concentrating on are going to be underneath the seat here. And we're looking for about, I would say, at least probably a half an inch away from the edge of the holes that we cut, because we're going to come back, run the fillet, and we just want a really good surface to bond to. So it's just being, you can be pretty aggressive with it, and you really, for any, especially like on the bottom of the glasses, knock all that shine off. And even if you burn into the fiberglass a little bit, that's fine. And then under the seat, it's just really kind of working kind of back and forth and really knocking the shine and putting some good grooves in that epoxy. Just so when we run the fillet, we're not going to run any risk down the road of that deciding to cut loose. So that's if you're out of buy and you're ready to get rolling, that's the best place to start for now. Is we're going to prep those surfaces, and then again, it's the same goes for the trunk, where that fits through. And also remember that we're going to have, it's not going to be right just at the edges. We want to give a good scuff to the top and bottom of that glass on the trunk, just to make sure that we're getting a really solid bond, and we're going to be able to get that, run that nice fillet, and be happy. Also a reminder, because the trunk sits either on or really close to the seat support for the rower here. So the back side of that, we want to go ahead and scuff that up as well, past the width of the trunk, because we're going to run a fillet right at the side of that all the way to the top to lock that dagger board trunk into place. So I'm going to mute myself for just a minute and do some diligent sanding, and I'll be back with you in a second.
Joel, I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering if I put that template up underneath the seat,
Yep.
could I then recess the cap for the rudder?
Yes. That you absolutely can do that. It's basically just, yeah, so by taking off one end of that template and bonding on, that is a possibility. It's just making sure that it's also just making sure that you're really good and scuffed up and you get good clamping pressure and plenty of glue in there.
We live on clamps.
You know, I thought about that as well, but then I worried about if I recessed it, how was I going to pull it back out? So I guess I'd have to leave enough just finger room to kind of reach in there. Or...
Yeah, so what I actually did, and back to what Eric had mentioned, when we the first one of these that I installed in one of the prams, I did just that, just to have that flush mount. You still have the shock cord that runs on the deck, but it does make it's still nice and flush. And for a pull, I went in and just potted a loop of just nylon like paracord into epoxy. So basically I just drilled a hole and tied a knot in the end of my loop, filled that with thickened epoxy and pushed it down in that epoxy to encapsulate that knot. And it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Just for kind of a quick, easy idea for a pull tab.
It just seemed to me like it would be easier to sit on without the 1/4 inch extra encouragement.
Right. One thing I was going to mention as well, kind of progressing through the prep for bonding in the trunk, is there a little scupper hole here under the seat. If you want to sneak a little sandpaper in there, because when we bond this in, we're actually going to come in from this side, and that's going to allow us to run the fillet on that on the aft end of that trunk. We'll be able to come in and basically we're going to fill that scupper hole with epoxy, and that's going to serve as our fillet that's going to really seal up that the aft end of that trunk, seated into the bottom of the boat. And it just adds some good structural integrity, and it's also that fillet is really our biggest barrier to any moisture intrusion kind of coming up in and through the bottom of the boat. So just kind of like here, I've just rolled up some sandpaper and I'm just kind of sneaking it in that scupper hole. Kind of moving through that step too, if you've got a nice finish, you're basically trying to mitigate as much refinish. You can also tape the front edge of this, take it off so you're not scuffing up your shine or your paint or whatnot. And then the same for when we apply that inside of that limber hole with the epoxy. Leave that tape on, and then once it's applied, you can pull it off, and it'll just kind of help with to mitigate any scuffing or any need for cleanup later on. So I've run through and once I've got my kind of my surfaces prepped, did the sanding on both the boat and the dagger board itself. I went in and refit. And I'm also just taking a look and making sure that I did a good job of scuffing where I'm going to bond that dagger board in place. And again, because it's been noted a couple times that there is extra on the dagger board. A couple options as far as the install there. If you don't want to worry about alignment initially, you can leave the dagger board proud both on the top and the bottom. And once that fillet is set, you can come back with a saw. Japanese saw works really well. Kind of tape the area around it and then just cut it flush, come in and sand it out nice and smooth. And then you're ready to do that fill. And do that on both the top and bottom. The second option there is you can kind of check the alignment because the dagger board is cut with the same rocker as the seat as well as the bottom of the boat. You can also mount that dagger board flush to the bottom, which would save you that cut a little bit farther down the road, or get it close to flush. That way you just got a little bit of trim instead of having to lop off a whole bunch of trunk. What I found as far as holding the orientation is I'll pop the pads off of a couple of spring clamps and then just kind of come in right on the end and get it to kind of just spring clamping those in flush. And that just allows it flush to the seat. That allows me to keep that orientation. It keeps that trunk from kind of dropping down and moving when we're running those fillets. Because ideally, once we find the home, once we find where we like it, we want to kind of hold it in that place where it stays. We can run those fillets and then take the clamps off. We'll be able to flush everything up and then a little backfill epoxy, all set. So it's kind of personal preference there. I do see it's not super difficult to flush up that face and trim off that excess, especially if you've got a little Japanese saw that doesn't have the back that you can cut flush. Just leave it a little long. Doesn't hurt.
Joel, I wanted to let you know the trick with stopping the glass short worked really well. It actually acts as, once I sanded it down, it acted as a sort of a wedge, and it just stops right with just the fairing of the glass going to the other edge.
Okay, nice. Yeah, too, and just I would make sure though that your fit isn't too tight, because you do a little bit of daylight between the trunk and the seat and then especially the bottom plank is fine, just because it's just going to allow you that once that fillet's cured, you've got some space to drop in a little unthickened epoxy to just really fill any little gaps and holes and whatnot.
I'm thinking I'd like to use the trunk template to create a recessed area. I'm curious if I need to. I've already cut the end of my trunk template, so it fits in there fine. But do I need to wet that first on both sides before I glue it up into there?
Yeah, so I would wet it. On the raw plywood surface for sure. Yeah, because it's a fairly critical bond that you make the optimal bond there, just because it is it's taking the load of that of that trunk.
Okay.
I chopped up my dagger board trunk for something else. the trunk template, I mean. And if you're gonna bond that template in, to create that recess, yeah, it's just gonna be patterning out that top cap.
Yep.
And then coming back and then putting that rabbit in there to recess it on top. But I think the easiest way to do that, probably with a patterned router bit. And it would be it's just opening that up because, yeah, I'm trying to,
Unfortunately, I don't have any router, so I'll just be laying that, the cap over the top of it, tracing it a bit and using my jigsaw to trim it off.
okay. Yeah, because I mean, if you're going to go that route, you'll probably want to wait to bond in your trunk until once you've got the template
Correct.
bonded in. So yeah, it'll just kind of delay it a day.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you'll follow the same steps I'm going to run through, running those fillets, and yeah, and then you'll have that recessed cap for the dagger board. I will say I have wrote it with the one with the recess just sitting on the cap, and I didn't find it. It wasn't bad.
Hmm.
Well, if you're trying to make it flush, won't that go up into the nose a little bit?
Well, so ideally, if you're talking about on the seat here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that seat is doubled. So you would have the ability to come in. If you cut that hole, ideally what you're looking to do is just go the depth of that first sheet of plywood that's on top. And that not all the way through, if that makes sense.
Yeah, now I forgot that it was doubled. Thanks.
But there, yeah, and you'll just want to be careful, that you're not, it's just figuring out how to cut out that recess without going all the way through. If you did go all the way through, I don't think it'd be the end of the world. It would just may look a little funny, but there'll be a cap on it. So
If we're routering it, can we just put the doubler on and do all that after we've installed the trunk?
yes. Yeah, you could definitely do that. Yeah, if you've made yourself if you could basically just set a straight edge, if you've got that pattern bit, you can get the right depth and just and zip that out to the depth that you're looking for. But yeah, just kind of running through. So I've got my, and with if you're planning to just have that recess, it's going to be kind of following along these same steps. It's just going to be step down. Once that template's in, you've got that hole cut out for that top cap. But it'd be the same idea. If you drop that trunk through, and you just want to brace it in place. If you're going to do the recess there, I would recommend trying to get that, the top of the trunk as flush as possible, to your doubler, to that template surface, when you install it, just because it's going to be a bit more difficult to come in and trim this excess, because you're not going to be able to come in flush to that surface because it's going to be stepped down. So there you're going to want you'll want to try and kind of hold that in place the best you can. Honestly, if you're going that route, and even on here, if you're happy with how, like, having it flush on the seat, you could probably come in with some painter's tape or Gorilla tape, something that's got a pretty good stick to it, duct tape, tape from the inside, and then roll your tape out on the seat, and use that tape to hold it in place. I think that'd probably be the easiest way to hold registration there. That way the top of your trunk is flush to the top of that doubler that you're going to install.
Thank you for that. You just made me realize some of the issues I'm going to have if I go for this recess step. So I think I've just decided not to.
We're not doing the recess either.
Yeah, I mean, again, I did, I'll walk you over to this other boat, show you what that looks like installed. Because I've got two other boats and I've taken them both out rowing, one with the recess, one without. And honestly, the only thing I notice is the shock cord, more so than the actual cap itself. And then it could also be worth just investing in a $9 Walmart cushion.
Can you zoom in a bit more? There you go. Oh, see, that looks nice though.
So this is just the cap. And like you were saying, it does make it a little difficult to pop out. But, it basically just sits in there pretty well flush to the deck of the seat.
So is there a problem then with just doing a regular install on the centerboard trunk? And then once everything's done, make a pattern for the cap and then just route that at the, one depth and use that rather than going through all the song and dance?
So I guess what you're saying is install it here and then router out the recess for the.
Yeah, put in the doubler and then put in the trunk normally. And then once everything's said and done, at that point, you just router out for your recess.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be yeah, you just make yourself a pattern there. Yeah, and as long as you're comfortable doing that, it shouldn't be a problem at all. It's just making sure you've got that. Yeah, it's just you've got the meat there to router into, and you've got a good bond to that doubler. But you would want to, yeah, it's basically you're going to be kind of double bonding. Put the doubler under there, fit your trunk, run the fillet on the bottom. I think that's what you're saying. And then you'll cut your hole with the router once everything's kicked and cured.
Yeah, once you put the doubler in, put the trunk in, which I was going to do at the same time. I was actually just thinking of putting a couple of small screws in to hold it, and then epoxy that whole thing together. And then once everything's kicked and cured, you could even go sailing in between. You could then, if it feels like it's a good idea, you could always add it later, kind of thing.
Sure. All right, so I'm happy with kind of the way my prep for the trunk. I'm happy with the fit of the trunk itself. And so kind of my next step is going to be kind of prepping for bonding that into place. I am going to I'm going to give it a quick wipe down. Just hit it with a paper, just a dry paper towel, and run through and just try and take away any of that excess dust that's in the areas that I scuffed up. Just to make sure that dust doesn't get in the way of the bonding surface. I'm just going ahead and kind of prepping myself to do some epoxy work. So I've got my gloves on, mixing cups ready to go. Mixing stick here. Looks like a good mixing stick. And then we're going to use some filler as well, because here we're going to be using our fillet blend of epoxy. We need something that, especially for the top fillet, something that's got some holding power, so it doesn't cut loose on us. Doesn't start kind of sagging down the side of our daggerboard trunk. We really want to hold that epoxy in place. I'm going to start with a 2-pump mix up. Work from there. See how far that gets us. We're going to run a fairly heavy fillet. I'm expecting this is probably enough for that top fillet and maybe some of the bottom. We'll see about both. But that kind of falls into, start small, make more as needed, so we're not wasting.
How much are you mixing up, Joel?
I did 2 pumps for the rocket system. I think it's an ounce a pump. But it's also just kind of a reminder too, and I know I'm sorry to because we've used 2 different systems for the 2 different classes, that I've kind of lost. I can't quite remember what the ratios were for the pumps. I'm also getting my squeeze bag ready to do some. Getting that ready for the building. Yeah, good consistency. We want to mix it till it's smooth, and then we want it nice and thick. So we pull it out on our mixing stick. A big glob will kind of hold up under its own weight. But we've run a bunch of fillets so far, so kind of running off of what you already know as far as that mix up. It's kind of a blend with good holding power. So I've got my fillet blend mixed up, got it in my squeezy bag. And what we're looking to do is I'll first run the fillet on the top just to get the dirty work out of the way. This is going to be like a couple of the fillets we ran during the build. It's kind of a blind fillet. What we're looking to do is just making sure we get enough epoxy in there. So if you go a bit heavy there, it's fine. It's also a joint that's not going to be seen. So if it's a little ugly, that's okay. And then I was just kind of one thing to mention as well, as far as seating this, the dagger board in place with clamping, is keep the clamps on the ends. If you were to clamp it here in the middle, it's going to pull that dagger board in. It's going to constrict that slot. So yeah, I would just make sure that you're clamping here for holding it in registration. Because if you were to run a spring clamp there, you're going to induce a bit of a bow, which could create for some trouble fitting a little bit later down the road. And we're looking for, I'd say, a little bigger than a pencil size bead. And then also remembering that we want to run that fillet up the back side of this seat support.
Are you doing like a #2 fillet on those?
I would actually I would suggest a number 3, go a little bit larger. And that's just to make sure that you've really got a good hold in there. Plenty of schmoo.
Okay, doke.
If you got some gaps kind of in the fit of that trunk, top and bottom, don't be afraid to give it a little back pressure on your fillet bag, and really work that epoxy down in those cracks. And then we're also remembering that we've got the little liver hole at the front of the seat. And I'm actually just taking my epoxy and just squeezing a whole bunch in there. Again, I'm kind of getting some back pressure, just kind of pushing it in and really kind of feathering it out, allowing for just make sure I'm filling all the little nooks and crannies in there. Because the last thing we want is some little holes and places where the water may decide it wants to rear its ugly head. And the two pump mix up that I did seems to be ample. One thing you can do as well is kind of on this the aft end, out towards the end of the seat, that corner where that all meets, underneath where my finger is here. Both those corners on each side, you can really fill that corner up with a good bit of epoxy. That's going to help bond that, just really give it a nice hold to that front seat structure, to the seat itself, and to the dashboard. It's just it's an area that allows everything to get tied together, and we're making that nice and strong. And the same goes for down at the bottom of the trunk where those three faces meet. So bottom plank, seat structure, and dashboard trunk.
Now, are you attempting in any way to do the underneath section there where the top of the trunk meets?
Up under the seat?
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to, I mean, mostly it's just kind of jamming the point of your squeezy bag into that corner, and then just kind of, and putting pressure and knowing that there's epoxy coming out, because we want to run a fillet on that edge where it's bonding from the seat to the daggerboard trunk. And once it's in there, it's just kind of running a blind fillet. Like for myself, if I sweep that fillet stick and I'm not getting a lot of excess, I know that I need to come back in there and add some more epoxy. It's also a place where a light finger fillet is probably not a terrible thing, just because it allows you to feel where there's epoxy and where there isn't.
Joel, might you think about putting fiberglass along that joint too from the underside?
I mean, it's something you could do if you want. I think as far as increasing the amount of strength, I think it's just you're reinforcing something that's already pretty darn strong. Because the way we're installing this daggerboard is it's being supported by the seat structure as well as the bottom plank structure, and that's what's really allowing it to lock it in place. And so the advantage of putting glass on is going to prevent any racking. In this situation, the seat and bottom plank are already doing that for you. So what we're needing to do is just tie those together. Running the glass over it will add that extra layer of durability, but I think it's just it would be vast overkill.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as you've got a really nice fillet in there, that should be plenty strong. It's warm in the shop. My epoxy is no longer usable. Where'd it go? What's there?
So we're just filleting all the way around that trunk.
Yeah, so all the joints that, all the way around. So yeah, around the top, around the end, down the front, or behind the front of that seat structure, and then all the way around the bottom.
Sounds great.
One thing we can do as well, and I'll mention it again, kind of as we wrap up, you run that fillet. We'll kind of, the next step we're going to move into is getting the hardware of that rudder installed. But sometime today, if you want to come back, even in the next couple hours, while that epoxy for that fillet is still a little bit gel, you can actually paint some unthickened epoxy right over the top of that fillet. It'll help smooth it out, and it'll also fill in any of the scuff marks that were kind of the outside of the fillet, if you want to make that nice and shiny and pretty again and not have to do anything else to it. But coming back and brushing it with, as it's kicking with some unthickened epoxy, will just help smooth out, and then also fill in any little pinholes or gaps that may have formed when you swept that fillet. Yeah, and the last thing too is when is don't forget to sweep the outside of that limber hole of that where we filled it with epoxy. I'm just going to come back with my fillet stick to match what was there and just clean it up, and it's basically just kind of capping the end off.
Joel, this is Eric. I just put a fill coat on the centerboard trunk last night. Made sure it was all prepped, a nice fill coat. I should just be able to straight bond that, right?
And was that with the silver tip, the System 3?
Yes.
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah, that silver tip's got a 72-hour open time. that should be the extent of the dirty work for today. The sticky, hard to get to fillets. Yeah, so what's going to be left as far as steps to come, as far as with that trunk, is yeah, we're basically, you want that epoxy to kick off nicely, let it cure, and the next step is going to be to come in with that flush cutting saw, and then just trim that up nice and flush to the seat. I would, it's not a bad idea, put a couple layers of tape down just to kind of help protect that surface from any scratches. Yeah, just kind of coming in flush. And then you can sand it flush, and then I would actually take a vacuum, pull out any dust that accumulates in that crack, and you're just going to work some unthickened epoxy in that crack. So I would just paint over it, give it a couple minutes, let it penetrate into any of those gaps, and then come back and paint it over again until you're not getting any more little pinholes where it's kind of, because that epoxy is generally thin enough that it'll find little air bubbles, little pockets, and the air bubbles will move out, and then you'll see little low spots. Just come back and keep babysitting that. And then it's doing the same step for the bottom of the boat. Is going in, because we're sealing up the end grain of this plywood, which is a little more vulnerable for water penetration, and making sure to have a good coat or two of epoxy on that is a good idea for longevity of the boat. And then the same, flip it over, flush up that trunk, and then work some epoxy in any of those little gaps. If you've got some little tight spots, you could even go in with the tip of a Japanese saw and kerf that out, just open it up a little more, just so you got room to get the epoxy in. But work it nice and smooth. Yeah, and it should be a good bond, should be good protected from the elements, and be ready for that dagger board. All right, so the next step, looking to move towards, is going to be working with the rudder assembly. So I've already got my rudder assembled, got everything fit through. I hope everybody got the hardware that Josh sent out. It should have been, I think we put it in the mail at the beginning of the week. But yeah, it's just that having the wrong fittings that first go around, where we had the 1 1/4, we tried to get you the 1 1/2, the 1 1/2 machine screws to get the right side there. I'm gonna go ahead and finish locking mine in. Let's see, what size is this? 3/8. Little wrench does a good job with those nylock bolts. And especially with these pintles, you can really firm up that hardware when you're installing it. Get a real nice tight fit, and that nylon nut will help ensure that it doesn't back out on you over time.
Is there something to keep the rudder from popping up out of the gudgeons?
Yeah, so we'll go through that. There should have been a little hold down tab with the gudgeons, and I'll show you what that does and how to install it when we put the gudgeons in place. I'll show you once I'm done tightening up this nut, I can show you what it looks like as well. What you were asking about, with the gudgeons, there should have been a little tab, stainless tab. It's got 2 holes in the top and it kinks. Just has a little bit of a kink there. And what that's going to do is once we get the gudgeons installed, when you drop the rudder in place, is that we're going to through bolt that into the transom, And when you drop the rudder in place, it keeps it from backing itself back up. So you actually have to depress that tab to then pull the rudder out when you want to pull it off the boat. So with the rudder assembled, the only hardware that I haven't installed is the holding mechanism, the spring mechanism for the flip up of the rudder, and that's what the shock cord, some of the shock cord was included for is for that mechanism, and then we're also looking to use the 3 smaller little stainless pad eyes. These little guys here. And there should have been 6 little screws that were part of that kit as well. And that's what we're going to use to attach these pad eyes in place and kind of hold those down. The first one we'll install, and also it's with the pad eyes for this particular portion, is we're going with there's 3 that are like size, and then 2 that are like size that are larger. One of the larger ones we're using for the downhaul for the sail, but it's the 3 smaller ones that are all the same size that we're going to use here on the rudder. Small Phillips head. And the first of those pad eyes is where the rudder, where that foil, the blade of the foil ends. You'll see where the back side of that rudder kind of makes that turn, has that little kink. And we're looking to install that pad eye just above that kink. And I'm going to go in with and sneak a fairly small drill bit. Let's see, the one I'm using is a 5/64, but like a little 16th inch bit up to, make sure I don't go too big. Probably up to, I wouldn't go to an 8, that's a little bit big, but you're just looking for just a small little pilot hole to just kind of help with the positioning of the screws. And with those pintles in place, I've just got the rudder itself to work on it, just hanging in that sculling notch that's on the transom of the boat. It just allows it to kind of stay in place for me. And what I'm looking at doing is taking that pad eye, kind of holding it in place. And there's not an exact registration for this. It's just getting the bottom hole right above the little kink, right above that blade of the foil. And then I'm just drilling that top hole for that registration. One thing you could do here is if you've got a little bit of leftover epoxy, even if it's starting to gel up on you and kick a bit, you can dab the tip of your screw into that epoxy before you drive that screw. And what that's going to do is when you drive that screw into place, that epoxy will kind of run up the threads and can just help seal up any little open grain that water could one day in the life of the boat decide to penetrate. And that just gives you just a little bit more peace of mind that you don't have one extra spot that water wants to jump in your boat. But it is important, like with these side pieces, we probably can get away without pre-drilling a hole. But in this end grain, we want to pre-drill that hole because that screw, if we don't, will act almost as a wedge. It's going to want to push those laminates of that plywood apart just because it's end grain of plywood. So once I get that top screw in place, come back with my drill, and we're going to throw in a pilot hole for the second screw. Again, I've taken a little bit of that extra fillet epoxy, even though on my end it's pretty jelly. At that point, I've got that pad eye installed on the back side of that rudder, on the back side of the rudder assembly. And what's going to happen is that shock cord that we're going to use to tie everything together is it's going to run through that eye, as well as our uphaul cord is going to run through that eyelet that allows us to flip that rudder up into place. And then the next piece of hardware that we're looking to install is the next pad eye. And what we're looking is the loop or the shock cord that's going to hold our rudder in place. Is we've got to add that, we've got to bring pressure. We've got to bring pressure in. So basically it's going to hold that into place, but also have that, once it pivots up, it will again kind of lock that, allow us to kind of lock that rudder up. And the positioning on that is, you'll notice with the rudder here is this kind of at the nose where it makes that turn. You've got where you can see where it kind of kinks off. Is we're gonna mount that pad eye just above the line, kind of off the. I'm backwards. I'm trying to look at a TV and a camera. Kind of off that point. We want to above that line, and it's going to basically run that line from this pad eye here, and we'll make a loop around the assembly. And we're looking to install that pad eye high enough that it doesn't fall into the slot that's here. We want to make sure that there's enough meat to catch this doubler in the rudder assembly, if that makes sense. So you're looking at just getting that pad eye high enough that you do have a good backing here, and you're not pushing that screw into the slot for that for the foil itself.
I lowered my bottom pintle, so
Okay.
it's right where you want to put that. Can I mount it just above there?
It should work up above that. Yeah, I don't see why not. I don't think yeah, I don't see why that would create any problems. And so I'm taking that. I'm taking that that pad eye, and I'm bringing it off 1/4 to 1/2 inch off of the inside face of the rudder assembly. And it doesn't have to be an exact location. I'm gonna go ahead and drop a hole there and get ready and insert the screw. And then I'm basically looking to just kind of parallel, just for uniformity. I mean, you can parallel it with that pintle there, and we're gonna run that shock cord basically just with a knot to hold itself in place up through and then around, and we'll meet on the other side. Just again, you want to make sure that we've got enough room in here that we're not sneaking our screw into our slot where that rudder is wanting to kick up.
So that's one of the small ones, right, Joel?
What's that?
That eye is one of the small ones?
Yeah, it's the 3 that are life size. The 3 small ones, they're getting placed. Are the ones that we're installing for that flip up assembly. It's for the shock cord. If you're like me and you drop it, you can't find it. It doesn't help in the assembly process.
How far from the edge are you putting the first screw?
So I came back, I would say probably a half an inch.
Okay.
If it looks like I'm installing a large pad eye for the shock cord for the flip up assembly here, it's because I am. But that's also because I lost the other one. So we'll roll with it. Yeah, so now at this point, I've got all three pad eyes installed. Uh-oh. It was there. Now I'm gone. Magic.
Quick question. I took care of my rudder assembly already. Is there any issue with me epoxying on the I don't know, what do you call it, the top cap to the dagger board?
No, yeah, that's fine. And that was going to be kind of my last step for today. But the idea there is that you just want to set your dagger board up in a position where you're making sure that it's that you're getting a good bond, so, and then it's perpendicular, so it comes kind of straight out of that cap, so it's not off to one side or the other. And
Sure.
what I've done there to kind of accomplish that it's just allowing a place where you can where you get, so like here you can see on the bench here, is I'll basically fill the slot in that cap with a thickened epoxy.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'll push that dagger board down into the trunk, and here I've got it clamped on my cabinet door. But you can use the floor, have it propped up on the edge of the bench or something, just so you're making sure that once it seats in there, it'll be straight. And then any squeeze out, you're wanting to just run a pretty nice healthy fillet around the edge. And then you can lay some just a little strip of fiberglass over top of that fillet to help tie everything together.
Ah, fiberglass too. Okay.
And then, so I'll kind of back to the rudder. I'm going to take my shock cord.
Joel, on the back of the rudder, is it a small eye there too?
Yeah, it's the 3 light size eyes. They're all the small ones.
And is that right above the bend?
Correct. So I'm going to take. I'm going to bring that shock cord into that top and bottom of that pad eye. I'm basically just taking an overhand knot and cinching that down nice and tight, running through the back side of that rudder, and then bringing it down and into the other outside pad eye. What I'm doing there is I'm going to stretch some tension in there, enough tension to kind of hold that into place, keep it from wanting to flip up, but not so much that it kind of interrupts the mechanism. And then I'm going to take my shock cord, I'll bring it around, and then just put another knot right through the bottom there. And at this point, I've got my, I've put that tension on that flip up assembly for the rudder, which will allow us to one, it holds it into place, and 2, it's going to allow us for the uphaul. And then that brings up the last step, is kind of lifting the tiller. You want to run the uphaul line over that white shift to the inside, and then we're going to tie that into place. And here I came back and put just a wood bead on the end, backed it up with a knot to give it a little extra pull. You can throw a knot on there. The idea there is I've got the uphaul, and ideally you didn't install a gigantic pad on like I did because I lost the low one. It won't pull through. Double knot that. That creates a system. And if you install the large pad on accident, it'll remind you.
So when you pull it up, the bungee is past the balance point and holds the rudder up at that point?
Yeah, that's the idea. Is that pulled up, that there should be enough tension, that it'll flip up. For like here, I'm a little bit light on the tension, but mostly, I mean, there's the idea there is that, yeah, you're coasting into shore, you can just flip that up, you don't have to worry about hitting. But the other idea is that if you do hit something with that rudder, it has the opportunity to flip up. But that's also kind of the importance of, and you may have to adjust it, is finding the right amount of tension to put in that shock cord for it to kind of find that the sweet spot. And you'll notice that there's a fair bit of extra of the shock cord. And the reasoning behind that is that we'll trim, once you've found you've got that flip up, the shock cord system where you like it. The extra shock cord will be used for holding down your dagger board. And it's taking that, and I can walk back over to the boat. Is you'll trim that shock cord, and the idea there is that there's going to be two holes. Once and I wouldn't drill the holes now because you've got that fillet there, but coming a half an inch off each side of the trunk of that dagger board, tying a knot in the end of your shock cord, running it up and over, and then through, and tying the backside, and that just gives you a couple of tension loops of that shock cord that keeps keeps the dagger board from jumping up on you, and also keeps the plug in place just when you're out and about. So kind of now that we've got the rudder assembly all together, the next step is positioning the hardware onto the transom of the boat, where we're going to hang that rudder. So from there, we're going to kind of drop the rudder out of the way. And we're going to head over and grab the first of the two gudgeons. These are the same, so you don't have to worry about figuring out which one's which, or right or wrong. Either or is good. And we're looking to position these kind of center below the sculling notch. And because we're using the doubler of the transom, so this thicker part as our doubler, that's what we're going to run our machine screws through, and we're going to bolt to that transom doubler, just so we've got some good meat to hold that hardware in place, and it can support that the weight of that rudder and any torque and tension that's pushed on it. So I've grabbed my 3/16 drill bit. I'm going to get that ready to pre-drill to bolt this part into place.
I'm a little worried about accuracy on this. So how are you are you using a level or something to make sure you're going straight down? How are you finding the hole locations?
So I'll, as far as accuracy there, first of all, what I can do, if it's clear for you, if it's painted on the back, it's a little difficult, is just finding center line. There is a dowel hole in the transom there for that doubler that will tell you. I mean, honestly, it's just finding the kind of the center of that sculling notch from here. You could measure that, or you can go off of the dowel hole to the inside. But I mean, for myself, as far as getting it lined up, is I'm going to hold that gudgeon up to that sculling notch, and pretty much eyeball it to mount at the bottom of that U, and I'm going to mount I'm just going to drill one hole. The reason being is that I'll come in, drill the one hole and sink that little bolt to hold it on, put some tension there, and then I can come back and measure and make sure that I'm flush and level to the top of the transom for that top pintle. And then once we get this gudgeon installed, this is going to allow us to basically find the center orientation for the second gudgeon to get mounted, because we'll be able to hold it into place with that gudgeon and kind of tweak it back and forth for center, if that makes sense. So here I've got at the top of my gudgeon is about make this exact. We can get a measuring apparatus. I'm going to mount the top of my gudgeon about 3/8 of an inch below that notch. And that just gives me, it's mounting it in good position for that, the location of the pintle, but also allowing me to still utilize that transom doubler to back the screws once we get them all set. So I'm just going to hold it in place, happy with that location. I'm just pushing a hole through, and then I'll bring in one of my screws and put that in to kind of hold that gudgeon in place.
So the top of your gudgeon is about 3/8 below the notch?
Correct.
Okay.
So I've got that top gudgeon. What I did is I went ahead and hardened up that first screw. And a couple options. One thing you can do is you can actually go ahead and slide that pintle into place. And you can use the rudder itself to almost kind of guide the location, the orientation of that gudgeon. Because with that, because it's got a long center line of that dagger board, everything's in line. You can take a step back, and it's pretty easy to tell if you're off, if you're canted one way or the other. And there is a little bit of play in that with the pintle and gudgeon, but as long as you're letting gravity kind of do the work, it's going to give you a pretty good idea that you've got good orientation, and that you're going to be pretty square across the top. You can also go with the orientation there, is you can go to the end of each one of these gudgeons, kind of on the bottom. I'll just take my tape measure, so here I'm 2 1/4 to the transom, and just coming to this side, making sure it's the same. Like theirs is a little bit lower because I'm 2 3/8. I may bring it up, and then I'm just going to kind of look. If it looks good, it's just at this point it's kind of trusting your eye. And once I'm happy with that, I'm ready to go ahead and push through the other 3 holes and mount that hardware. And this is going to be the bag that's got all the shorter screws, the shorter hardware for mounting that. You can also, I'll take the head of the screw, and just so there's not that extra, it's personal opinion on which side you want to look at when you're in the boat, or which side you want people to look like on the outside of the boat. Here I've got the head of the screw from the outside going in, but it doesn't, it shouldn't really matter too much. And I'm going to go ahead and harden up all the other 3. And so there I've got my hardware, I've got that top gudgeon installed. I'm going to go ahead and hang that rudder. Go ahead and hang the rudder in place. And grab the second gudgeon. One thing here that'll give you an idea as far as center line, if you haven't painted the outside of the boat, of the transom, is you do have the tab. The orientation of that seat when we installed it came through is generally running center line of the boat. So you can use that as an orientation. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that gudgeon and I'm going to slide it into place. Finding the kind of the happy kind of where the rudder puts that and is happy with it. And then once it's in place, you can just let the weight of that rudder kind of hold it in. And what I'm going to do is I'll step back and just take a look at it, like just eyeballing center line there, making sure I'm happy with the location of that hardware, making sure that that just the placement of the rudder looks right. Because ideally here, with that in place, we're pretty well set. Because it's basically letting you know that the orientation is good and it looks good. Because it by eye it looks good. You're pretty well set. And then this is going to be a little bit trickier hardware to install because we are going to have to go below that little deck. And we're going to use that same idea as the top. Is basically I'm going to start by just drilling one hole. And inserting that screw just to make sure it doesn't go walking around on me. Once that's in place, so taking a look, you can also come in with your tape measure, measure each side to that bottom flank of the boat, just for good measure, as far as making sure that it's getting set in level. And once we make that attachment, that it looks nice and is in a good place to live. I'm gonna go ahead and finish off there. The other two holes. And ideally too, so I mean, here we're just kind of fitting this hardware before we make kind of everything lines up, everything's looking good. Should be able to pop that rudder out and pop it right back in with a fairly easy fit. And then because we hung it on that top gudgeon, bringing that bottom gudgeon up kind of snug on that pintle should give us the correct spacing and orientation for that to fit nicely. With the last step being coming in and installing the tab that'll ensure that the rudder doesn't decide to go on vacation while you're out sailing. And then for kind of the proper location of the hold down, I'm mostly going to take that tab, and what you're looking to do is just mount it. You're putting it in an area that's above that pintle, above the head of that pintle there, and you don't necessarily need it to be on top of it, so you're not worried about this snug fit. And I'm leaving probably about 1/4 of an inch, 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch between that tab and the pintle itself. And I'm just going to come in with a pencil and mark that. Just mark through the top hole on just a kind of ballpark location of where I want to install that part. In this instance, it's not ultimately necessary to back these screws. Just the idea that this is a non-load bearing part. We're looking to put those in just to keep the rudder from popping out when sailing. So having a backing plate there isn't completely necessary. Once I'm happy with the location of that tab, I'm going to I'll drill a hole in place. And again, I'm just doing the one. I'll put the first bolt in, and then I can get my alignment set up once the first bolt is in. And here, because I'm going to have a bit of a little extra screw coming out of that nut, I actually put the head of the screw on the inside of the boat. That way, because I have a little extra screw coming out of the nut when it's locked down, it'll be to the outside of the boat. I don't have to look at it. Once I'm ready, taking a look, I'm just looking at this is in line, kind of with the top and bottom gudgeon. I'll go ahead and push through a second hole.
Joel, I'm finally with you.
How's it going, Warren?
Good.
Yeah, right now we're just kind of finishing up on the installation of the hardware on the transom of the boat. And then before that, we installed our daggerboard trunk. And once we move through this step, you'll be able to jump in on the last step of the day, and then I can kind of recircle wagons and kind of recap everything that we've done.
Okay.
with that hold down tab, as I tighten it down, I just want to get it snug. I'm not looking to kind of reef on it. Just so it's, I'm not just digging into the fly. It's just that single layer of ply for the transom. At that point, upon installation of that rudder, basically that will happen is when you install it, that tab will engage that pistol and not allow it to jump out of place. So once you're any time forward, you're wanting to take it out, it's just depressing that spring tab, and it should allow you to slide that rudder right out of that slot.
So you're about an 1/8 inch above it?
Yeah, I left, I would say about, an 1/8 to 3/16 above that pintle. And that just allows, because as long as it's not, ideally, as long as it's not longer than the pintle itself, it's most any amount of space there. And because the tie-ins are pretty high up on that tab, it gets you well above that seat, so you don't have to worry about the attachment, that seat getting in the way. And then from there, you've got, kind of opens up that pivot. The original rendition, they had installed the tiller through the sculling notch, which was a little befuddling in the fact that the first time they took it sailing, they snapped the tiller off because it was far too constricted for the rotation. If anyone was worried, I did find my lost hardware. It was in the last place I looked.
On putting the lower gudgeon in, are there any tricks?
Tricks as far as just like location?
Yeah.
The best way, if it still registers through, if it's just the epoxy surface, you should be able to see above where the gudgeon is going to mount. You should be able to see the tab where the seat tab through the transom, and that's center line of the boat. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then you just get it so it's snug up against the pin?
Yeah, and so what I'm doing is I'm pushing that gudgeon into place with that tiller, basically with the rudder hanging, and I'll get it into place, and gravity will kind of hold it into place. And then I'm looking at just kind of orienting, just kind of leveling it off. But yeah, ideally it should just go right up to the collar of that pin.
Okay.
right, and then kind of the last step we're looking at motoring in for today. I'll run through is getting the cap of that dagger board installed and bonded into place. So what I've got here is I've got my dagger board, and when I wet it out with epoxy, I did leave that top inch and a half of raw plywood. If you haven't, if you've got that all sealed up, you may want to come in, just give it a quick scuff in that top inch or so, and just to ensure a good bond. Just knocking all the shine if it's there. If not, you don't have to worry about it. And then we're finding the cap for our dagger board, and that's that's the cap. It's got the long slot in there. And what we're going to do is you want to set yourself up in an area that allows you to orient the dagger board itself into place upright. For me, I'm lucky enough because I do have these cabinets. I can open it up. And then just clamp the dagger board itself into place. But what I'm looking for is basically a place where I can hold the orientation of that foil so that the cap sits on it square on the top instead of kind of canted to one side. And that's just going to allow it to sit more flush onto the deck of the seat itself. You can do that by using the edge of the table. You could use a chair and the ground, but just something that allows you to, will allow it to cure in the proper orientation. Once I've established the way, my technique of doing that, I'm going to throw on some gloves, and I'm going to mix up a little bit of just a single pump of epoxy. Mix, and then once it's all mixed up, I'm going to go ahead and thicken it up to our standard fillet blend.
Hey, Joel, did you wet the cap first or do you do that on bare wood?
You can pre-wet that out because we're going to kind of pot it in place. You're going to get there's going to be a lot of bearing surface there, and we're also going to drop in a little bit of, cover it up with a little bit of fiberglass. So if you want to wet that out, you can. I don't think it's all that necessary. Yeah, your standard fillet blend. You can actually even run a little bit there, just because you've got gravity is going to work that fillet, work in favor of that fillet. You don't have to worry about it standing up on itself. put it in a squeeze bag. What I'll do is I'll take that slot that's in that cap, and I'm basically going to give myself a nice squeeze of epoxy, just right down the middle. I'm looking to mostly fill that slot with my fillet blend of epoxy. You can go fairly heavy with this if you want. Just the fact that once it's in place, I've got where I'm going to stand up my dagger board. I'm going to take that dagger board, I'm going to push it just right into the slot. And what that's going to do is making sure that is fully engaged in the slot that was pre-cut for it. Kind of making sure that I'm happy with that orientation. And ideally, I mean, you really want to push it down. You shouldn't get squeeze out. And what that's going to do is it's going to squeeze the epoxy into any gaps that are around the edges of that cap, as well as leave you with some epoxy to run a quick fillet. Here, I'm going to actually come back and add a little more, just in some spots that I didn't get quite enough squeeze. Once I've done that, I'm going to come back and sweep it with my fillet stick. Here, like a number 1, number 2 works well. I tend to get a little lazy in instances like this and just run a quick finger fillet. Because we're just looking to bridge the 2 faces from that cap to the dagger board. And the last thing I'll do there, I'm going to take some of my scrap fiberglass here. Looks like I'll cut them roughly 10-inch long by 1.5 inch wide strips. Basically just coming off with little fiberglass tapes. And I'm going to lay that just to kind of bridge over my fillet. Just kind of stretching some tension into there. And then I'm just going to just lightly push that fiberglass right into that fillet that I just ran. Just kind of working my hand over it, smoothing that out. And you'll see that the fiberglass will leach a little bit of the epoxy out of that blend. And just kind of hold it into place. And we're going to come back and repeat that step on the other side. And what this does is it just allows for a good bridge, a good, nice, just allows you to tie in those 2 surfaces. And I'm letting it run long off the ends. I'm not trying to get it to wrap around that corner. What I'm really interested in is really just tying that ramp together. And once all the epoxy cures, I'll come back and then just trim the ends that are running a little bit long. Just laying that glass, allowing that fillet to allow the glass to take that contour. And then the last step I'll make is coming through and wetting out that fiberglass. You can even, like here, I'm just gonna go ahead and trim off that little bit of excess I've got, get it out of my way. And with this, I'm taking epoxy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wet out this fiberglass, and then I'm going to have some left over because it's not going to take a whole lot to get that fiberglass wet out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take what's left and come back and paint the fillets from the daggerboard trunk, at least the ones on the bottom, just to smooth them out, really help them make it look nice and mitigate any more work down the road.
Joel, is that totally unthickened epoxy you're putting on?
Yeah, over over that fiberglass that I just laid down.
Okay, and what are you using to apply it?
I just basically rolled up a little rag.
Okay,
Most of the reason because I am lacking in the foam brush category. Yeah, the epoxy I've got, the mix, it does look, I mean, it's got a little bit of thickener in it, but that's only because I used the same cup to mix the epoxy that I did the fillet blend, and it just picked up the residual little bit of filler that I used in that step.
there's plenty of slop in the daggerboard trunk, right? It's not going to make it too thick to go into the daggerboard trunk.
Yeah, there's room in there for a little movement. I mean, you don't want to fill it that bridges all the way to the edge of that cap.
Right, right.
But there should be enough play in there for it to wiggle around in. And you can also just ease the edges of the inside top edge of the trunk itself if you need to alleviate for the fillet if it's a little bit, if it's not fully engaging into the slot. And then once it's all, I've got the epoxy in place, I'm just coming back and again with the Lazy Man fillet stick, finger fillet. I'm just making sure that that little fillet is nice and smooth under the tape. There's not any lumps and bumps, and it's gonna cure up nice and look nice. And then any of the little raggedy, kind of squirrely ends that you're left with are easy to come back, trim off, and sand out and make look nice and presentable. Again, any of that unthickened that you've got left, you can go back and just apply it to those fillets that we ran for our trunk. And that's just going to kind of help smooth everything out, shine everything up, and make it look nice.
Do you generally put a fill coat on that fiberglass on the dagger board, or you just leave it as is?
With that dagger board there, I mean, it is. I went pretty heavy on the epoxy. In this instance, I'm not too worried about it floating the glass because it's got that fillet blend kind of holding it down into place. So I basically went pretty heavy with the epoxy to wet it out. And that would give me a little bit to sand and not have to worry too much about burning into the cloth.
So is that dagger board essentially done now, or are people like sanding it one more time and painting it, or what's the recommended finishing strategy?
I mean, I think there it's all kind of personal preference, aesthetics. I myself have done for a high abrasion, more high abrasion parts, something like that. I tend to not paint it, just in the fact that it's just going to get any sand and gravel you pick up on that dagger board and pull it through the trunk. You'll leave little bits of sand and gravel in the trunk, and it'll just scratch it to pieces. One thing that so, I mean, just a kind of just your epoxy fill coat on the glass of that dagger board is probably fine. You can also, if you do a flow coat of epoxy on the outside, scuff it up. You can get graphite powder to use as an additive for the epoxy. And that graphite powder just increases the durability and kind of slickness of the finish of the epoxy and can give you a little bit more durability. But ultimately, I mean, it's kind of up to you on which direction you want to go. But I myself, as far as the dagger board goes, will probably just leave it as is.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, another thing, if you've got any like, I mean, you can put some anti-fouling paint on there, would be a little more durable, like an eco bottom paint type stuff. But yeah, any finish you put on there, you're wanting to think of durability. But as far as the rudder assembly and that foil, you can kind of doll that up a little more, just because other than that bottom edge of the rudder, it's not going to see a ton of wear and tear. And for me, that's going to end up just getting painted in the same scheme as the boat.
Joel, I think I must have missed where the large eyelet goes, the second one.
The second large island, so that's kind of a floater. I was actually going to, I was going to run over that just about 20 seconds after you asked it. That's where I was headed. But for myself, that island was included as a pad eye. It's kind of to be installed on the bow of the boat. I know for myself, that's where I'm going to end up putting it. And it just makes a good bow eye. So here, I'm looking to install that. Just kind of center on the doubler of this forward transom. So I'll take that eye there and just install the hardware through that transom, and it just adds just a place, if you need a bow rope, an extra tie up, tie down, just right on the bow of the boat there. And I'll end up just centering that just in line with that dowel that we use for orientation for installing the transom doubler. And for me, as far as most of the hardware that I've installed today for the boat, I've gone through and just kind of hand tightened everything. I went and I hardened up enough of the screws here to make sure my orientation was good. But ideally, what we're looking to do is eventually, especially for the folks that haven't finished, put finish on the boat. When you go to paint or go to put, like if you want to varnish or just epoxy coat the inside, pulling all that hardware out is going to make it a little easier to go ahead and get everything painted the way you want and then reinstall all that hardware and your hatches. Just because of the fact that you go ahead and install the hatches now, you come back to paint, that just adds more tape lines that you've got to use to keep your hatches from getting paint on them. But it also allows you the opportunity to come in and paint the end grain where you cut those holes through the seats to seal that up. And then also having that hardware out when you do the final install, both of the hatches and any of that final fit hardware, it's a good idea to back any of that with some sort of bedding or sealing compound, whether it be just a simple like silicone caulk, or what I've found with general boat use, which works really well as both a sealant and adhesive, is Sikaflex. Comes in a tube. I know they sell it locally here. You can order it. It's fairly cheap. I think it comes out to like $6 or $7 for a tube. And just caulk it out. And you can also get it in a few different colors. You get a white, black, and gray, I believe. But what this basically does is it allows you to create gaskets. And it's just like installing a hatch. It's running a small bead around the edge of that hatch and then just seating that in and installing your hardware. And that's going to allow that. It's going to allow that sealant to kind of push out, create a flange, a water barrier, letting water get under that hatch. And then the same for any of the hardware, for the pintles and gudgeons, and then all the screws that come through. When you're going to do your final thread, it's a good idea to kind of go ahead and put just a dab of that sealant compound kind of in your through holes. And that way, when you install the hardware, it just creates that gasket. And you can also do it, you can put a small bead behind any of the hardware, say on the transom. So when you're going to final install these gudgeons, just the smallest amount, because you don't really have a lot of space in there. And this is also an opportunity where you could tape off close to the edge. That way you squeeze out, you pull the tape off, and you're all set. But just getting a nice sealer, keeping water from penetrating into any of that hardware. The ones you're really worried about is the bottom gudgeon, because it's going to be closer to the water line. But yeah, any steps that you can take in the matter of keeping water away from raw wood is always going to be a plus. And to that point as well, you can also you can bed all of that with epoxy as well, but you'll end up with a fair bit of waste there. So just a nice flexible adhesive / sealant, or even just a sealant, doesn't really need any adhesive properties. Works great. And then if you've got to come back and replace a piece of hardware, you're not fighting something that cures hard like an epoxy.
And before painting, I assume we sand?
The epoxy surfaces?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, to get any type of bond on epoxy, you have to knock the shine off. So any prep before painting, and I would suggest going to 220 grit, just because 220 will hide all the scuffs that are in the epoxy when you go to paint. If you just sand it to like 80, you'll tend to see you can find, if you use a random orbit sander, you'll tend to find little swirlies in your paint. But yeah, I mean, and that's pretty much it as far as the install for just getting all of our parts in the boat. It's also kind of remembering too, still got the finished bits for that dagger board trunk. Kind of coming back to it, making those trims. And then it's going to be really important to paint that end grain and fill in any small gaps that you end up with between the dagger board itself and the seat, as well as the dagger board and the bottom of the boat. It's just wet that out, maybe wait an hour, let that kind of gel up, and flip it over and do the same process. And from there, you should be ready to you haven't painted, to paint and then go sailing, or you could just say to heck with it, I want to go sailing anyway.
Can I ask a question about the Skegs? I might have missed it, but did you already put those protectors on the Skegs in a previous class?
Yeah, so we put I know, and that was kind of one of those optional things. Some folks did, some folks may not have. But I did show definitely mentioned we're talking about installing those Skegs.
Putting the battens on there.
Correct.
Okay. I'll look for that.
Could you show me the detail on the line that goes down to the rudder, to pull the rudder up? See how you do that?
Yeah, so this is the full rudder assembly. We've got here with the tiller flipped up. This is your up-haul cord. Runs through over the ship, which is mounted in the center barrel bolt. And then we added the pad eye to the back of the rudder. And then also added pad eyes below the pintle hardware on each side. And that's where we're running our cord to that allows us to hold that that rudder into place.
So the pad eyes are the two smaller little pad eyes that we got in the.
Yeah, let me. So yeah, it's that there should be 5 pad eyes. You've got 2 larger ones and 3 small ones. The three smaller ones, you're gonna have one mounted on each side, and then one here on the back of the rudder.
Okay.
So I'll pull the assembly out. So it's kind of, you can see on both sides. I've got the pad eyes. We've got here, and then the same on the other side. That where you tie in the shock cord, and then we're bringing that shock cord through that end pad eye here, and then we're also tying in our uphaul into that same pad eye. So it's kind of a 2 birds with 1 stone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I clearly must have made my my hatch so far over to the side that it's very hard for me to reach behind to get to those gudgeon fasteners.
Okay.
Any suggestions? I mean, my arm doesn't fit in there. Do I just wait until I can find a 8-year-old to stick their small arm in there? Because I can't reach back there.
One thing you could try. So like here, I've got my 3/8 wrench.
Yeah, I'm sticking it on a pair of vice grips and just feeling around in there, hoping I can find it.
Yeah, and it's kind of that's kind of the you're kind of just feeling around in the dark back there. Let me find some. So one trick I found that can work for getting those started, especially since these are going to pretty much bolt in flush, is I'll take some. I've got my wrench, and I'll put the nut in the wrench and then tape the back side of it to hold that nut where I want it to. And that sometimes can give you an extension to kind of reach back and hopefully find the end of that screw and then screw it in from the back side. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the other another option is you could install a second hatch.
No.
And put it on the face of the bulkhead, and then you would have really easy access in there.
Well, I was trying to put the nuts on the inside just so it looks smoother, but that makes it hard to get to them to get them started.
Right.
I understand why you want the nuts on the outside, on the top, especially if somebody's leaning in the back there when you don't have a rudder or something like that. But I just thought, it might be cleaner to have them on the inside, but I just can't seem to reach them. So maybe I'm just going to flip it around, and I think I'll be able to get at least a screwdriver in there more than I will be able to find a nut,
Right.
know for the sail, when we have the downhaul on the sail, what holds that rope in place?
What's that?
When we install the downhaul for the sail, going through that front eyelet, is there a clamp or something we put on the rope to hold it down?
I believe so, and that all the hardware that's related to the sail rig itself will come with that and then we'll run. We're gonna once the sail is out, Josh and I are gonna do a quick installation tutorial on how to set everything up. It'll probably be just a 20 to 30-minute video on how to set up your entire boat. And we should we'll be able to cover that as part of it. So there's no confusion. And everybody will get a copy of that video.
Sounds great. Look forward to sailing this.
Joel, I'm going to sign off. I'm down to like the couple of percent on my iPad again. But
Okay.
this has been extremely helpful. So thank you so much. These are wonderful classes. And I'll see you at the Maritime Center when I'm walking my dog again.
Sounds good. Yeah, come see me and I'll get you that tiller.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks again. Thank you.
Yeah, if you'll measure the width of that slot before you come, and that'll help me out to cut it to whatever size it needs to be.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks again. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Have a nice afternoon.
Can you give me one more close-up shot on the shock cords for the dagger board?
Shock cord, oh, for,
Bungee for the dagger board, yeah.
yeah, so we're looking there. Move it down. And go ahead and shoot a couple holes there to just kind of demo how that would go in. You're looking at coming about an inch back from the end of the dagger board here.
Okay.
And mostly, I would say, you're wanting it to be wide enough that it's to the outside of
Sure.
that plate. Maybe give yourself 1/8 of an inch to the outside, and then you're basically gonna shoot a hole through the seat, and
Okay.
you'll go in for just shoot a hole big enough for the shock cord. You'll push it through, knot it off at one end. Pull it up, pull it down through, and then when you stretch it as much as you can, kind of knot it off on the other end as well, just so you've got a little bit of tension in that shock cord.
Okay.
And that's going to just allow it to kind of hold. You don't need it to be just super, super tight, because you want to be able to slip it off of the end of that cap. But you want it tight enough that it's not, that it's holding in place and it's not bouncing around too much.
Aesthetically, does it look strange? Like the shock cord's pretty thick. I thought we might have used a little less obtrusive looking one, maybe a thinner one of some kind. Does it aesthetically look okay to have those two things just hanging out across?
I put it in the so in the rendition that's all rigged, it's not here. It uses this same cord. One thing I found, so with the other boat that I showed earlier, you can also kind of recess a slot on the top of that dagger board cap to get it just a little more flush. But I mean, personally, I think it looks fine.
Okay.
The reason we went with a little bit heftier cord was it was just more durable. Just the constant in and out, especially with that more knife edge of the foil. We were worried about it just kind of working through a thinner shock cord.
Okay. I'll probably just drop off. I'm going to be fighting this gudgeon for a while. So I'm sorry, what else did you add? I said I'll probably just drop off. I got to fight this gudgeon fasteners, but I'm sorry I interrupted you. What were you saying?
I don't think I had anything important. So
okay.
But yeah, so I mean, if you find any more questions, feel free. We'll be on for a little while longer. So
okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Joel, I have one of the larger pad eyes left over. Is that the one that you put up at the bow?
Yeah, so the larger pad eye, we're just using that as a lead eye. I brought it over and mounted it just right there on the front of the boat. Just when I took that through the transom doubler here. I'm doing a very good job of showing. Yeah, it's just basically a tie-in for the bow, just the bow line.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Joel, just for information, that doubler up underneath went in with no problems. And
It was good?
Joel, if I remember correctly, in the last class, you were talking about possibly putting a fillet at the bottom of the trunk, fiberglass over the fillet. Is that still a reasonable idea, or is it just overkill?
So you're talking about running fiberglass on the bottom, fill it at the trunk? I think,
Yes.
yeah, so I mean, it's definitely something you can do if you want. I think the benefit is negligible. Just the fact that fillet's going to do a good job of just reinforcing that joint, but where we set the trunk through the planking and through the seat is what's really going to hold it in place. And so adding glass, I don't think is really going to, it'll beef it up, but I think you're just kind of adding bulk to add bulk at that point.
Okay, won't worry about that. Just curious.